So every single time some type of national tragedy involving a firearm comes about, basically the exact same like memes have been traveling around for like the last 6 years start surfacing everywhere. So today we're gonna unfortunately like have to analyze one of them simply because apparently there's still like left wing big brains that are like, bet you hadn't thought about this. So, anyways, let's look. So here is the meme. This meme ends up at quite literally every single national tragedy that ever shows up, and people are like, bet you hadn't thought of that, had you? So what it tries to juxtapose is the right for self-defense and having a firearm against the capability of having an abortion performed. I specifically didn't use the word right because in our entire understanding of what a right is, nobody would have a right to perform an abortion. Like our entire pretext of understanding what a right is specifically assumes that they are given to us, they are inalienable and given to us by some external source, in this case our creator. And there wouldn't be any like there would be no comprehension of why there would be a right for an abortion when our assumption is that rights are bestowed upon us by our creator. And unsurprisingly, the left has not found any particular way to establish or explain what is a right outside of using like Christian vernacular and understanding that it's given to us by an external source. Anything other than that specifically is a want. So in this case, the reason we have the Second Amendment is the right of self-defense, and it's more to protect having capability of technology both now and the future, and that was the context of the time, versus like a weapon to go hunt deer with, right? Like you hear often this gaslighting of like, well, you don't need that to shoot deer. Deer don't have Kevlar vest. Yeah, there's nothing to do with the Second Amendment. Like completely unrelated. So this meme pops up like every single time a national tragedy comes about, and it's like, well, bet you hadn't thought of this. So here, let's look here. How about we treat every young man who wants to buy a gun like a woman who wants to get an abortion? First off, massive false equivalency. Why would we even compare these two? But let's continue. Mandatory 48-hour waiting period. A lot of states do have waiting periods. But okay, we'll let that one slide. I mean, like states fundamentally do. Even fairly conservative states have waiting periods for some types of firearms, i.e., like handguns. If you don't have if you're not pre-vetted and having a concealed carry permit. So states such as good for instance is Florida, super conservative Florida, run by terrible Ron DeSantis, has a wait period on handguns, which if we're talking about like firearms that actually cause risk of death. And in case of homicide, it's like 95% or something like this figure, like almost close is handguns. So many places do already have a weight on handguns. Parental permission. Okay, so this one makes no sense because the only time parental permission is required in a case of abortion is for a minor, and minors can't buy guns. Period. So, already exists. Nice try. Let's continue to the next one. A note from his doctor proving he understands what he's about to do. Okay, again, fundamentally, it's basically already exists because you have to go through a background check. When you go to purchase a firearm, the background check is supposed to vet if you have, risk mentally. So that, for all practical purposes, already exists. A note from a doctor proving he understands what he's about to do. What understanding you're about to purchase a firearm? The natural implication here makes no sense because you're purchasing a firearm. The other in the action of an abortion is an individual is about to die. These aren't connected in any particular way. Like you're about to purchase a firearm, meaning you are about to partake in the exact same action as has happened 394 million times in our country, and it means that your probability of committing a homicide that year is now 0.0000. Hang on, I did the math on this already. Let me look here. 0.00004 is your probability of using that gun to commit a homicide that year. Whereas the ratio of a death taking place when you go to commit an abortion is quite literally 1 to like over 1. Actually, it's higher than 1 because there's a few like abortions that go wrong and end up in the loss of the mother's life each year. So your ratio is higher than 1 to 1 when you go to commit an abortion versus a ratio of 1 to 0.00004. So the correlation of needing a doctor to explain this doesn't make any sense. We could use a statistician. Maybe we should get a statistician to explain the probability being 0.00004 that you might use that firearm in a homicide versus the 1 to greater than 1 ratio of a human life being lost in an abortion. Let's see here. A video he has to watch about the effects of gun violence. I particularly love this one. What do you think literally the news is all the time? Like, we see the continual, like, prol scroll of risks of gun violence, which is actually, like, incredibly, incredibly low in this country. Like, it's the probability of being involved in gun violence is very low. We're in a country of 300 million people. If we compare this, like, if we compare even, like, mass shooting events, and we go worldwide, what we find is like we're actually quite low on the list, like 64th or something like this. Like, we're not even that high on the list, and we are a very, very gun dense country. The thing is, we're just a big country. We're a country of 340 million people, so the probability of there being an event is fairly high. And the issue is you just see it all the time. Like, when analysis is done on the amount of times likely where you're going to use a firearm in self-defense, like, it so far outweighs the use of a firearm for anything like to commit crime. Like, for instance, I think the very, very liberal estimate, when I say liberal, left-wing estimates put it at like 100,000 times a year you use a gun for self-defense, whereas like right-wing advocate of guns for self-defense purposes would put it at something up towards like 2 million. So let's just say I take the 100,000, and what we see is that there's around like 19,000 times a year that a gun is used in a homicide. So even your probability of pulling out a firearm and using it for self-defense versus using like something where a life is going to get lost, in the case of like an act of evil, is like a 1 to 5. Like, you're 5 times more likely to use it in self-defense. So the fact that people see only the times that it's used to commit an act of evil, like, so disproportionately, is it necessary that they watch a video about this? It seems that like you literally can turn on CNN like every single night and see this. I'm pretty sure they're fully well aware. Okay, so, and an ultrasound wand up the blank just because. I think he added the just because he knows there's no like logical justification for this, even in their like bizarre false equivalency they're trying to create between these two. Like, there's a logical reason in which you conduct an ultrasound before an abortion to determine if you even need an abortion. The ultrasound up, a particular orifice of an individual to determine if they need a firearm. I mean, I suppose that might be logical. If they don't have a firearm on them, maybe they would need one. I don't know why else you would even suggest that. So I think that's why I even said just because again, massive false equivalency. It doesn't really make any sense. Let's close down all but one gun shop in every state and make him travel hundreds of miles, take time off work, and stay overnight in a strange town to get a gun. I feel like you don't know gun enthusiasts at all. Like, to tell them that in order to own a firearm, they might have to like travel and stay in another town for a night. Like, but again, we're trying to juxtapose the fact that like ownership of a firearm is the equivalent of like killing a human life, like a 1-to-1 rate. Again, 1 to greater than 1 ratio, and committing an abortion, that a human life is going to be ended. So this is the reason why we're opposed to it. We're opposed to it because it ends a human life. The action of purchasing the firearm does not. But okay, so drive hundreds of miles, take time off work. I still feel like most gun owners probably do that, and they probably likely do at least once a year for something firearm related. Make him walk through a gauntlet of people holding photos of loved ones. Like, we literally have to see this all the time. I'm about to show you what I mean in just 1 second, but like we literally have to see this insanity all the time from like hyper irrational, very, very, very like ill people. Holding photos of loved ones who were shot to death. But again, this is so incredibly rare. Like, the odds of trying to find that person and put them locally where you're at would be very, very difficult. people call him a murderer and beg him not to buy a gun. So again, the reason why committing an abortion, again, is a murder, because quite literally every single time you walk into that clinic, a life is ended. It's not like nature's do-over of a pregnancy. It's not like oh, well, now we've magically reverted back to being unpregnant. Like you've quite literally ended a life in order for that to happen. So it's a 100% of the time that you go commit an abortion, a life is ended. And in the super, super rare cases the life isn't ended, there was a piece of legislation 2 years ago where Republicans said if an abortion is attempted and the infant survives the attempt at a late-term abortion and it makes it out of the womb miraculously, that it should be given life-saving care. Like, even the left didn't want that. They're like, no, once we've slated this abortion for our blood sacrifice, there's no way out. It has to happen. We have to ensure that the baby is dead. That's the only possible course of action. Once it's out of the womb, once the decision has been made, it doesn't matter. We need to make sure our blood sacrifice takes place. This is why we're opposed to abortion. The ratio of purchasing a gun, therefore becoming a murderer, because these things aren't equivalent, because the mere ownership of a firearm doesn't make you a murderer. There's an additional action that has to be taken. With abortion, there's no additional action that has to be taken. Once the abortion has taken place, the baby is dead, the murder has been committed. Owning of a firearm, you could sit in that status from that point to the remainder of your life and never, ever, ever logically reach the status of murder. So this is why these things just don't make sense. They never have been. They never have. They fundamentally don't understand like the concept of a right. The reason that we have the right of the Second Amendment is it's the right of self-defense. This is an inalienable right bestowed on us by a creator. And if we start with that pretext in our understanding of a right, which is the only concept we have of understanding a right in our current state, in our current nation, we have no way to end up at the situation where we think that abortion should then be a right. But if I strongly suspect there's an interesting correlation in regards to this right of self-defense and our unique background in a Christian worldview, and I'll show you why. All right. Let me see here. Let me get this set up. This, I think, is kind of interesting.
Piece of shit! Piece of shit! This guy. You're not broken! Fuck you! Fuck your guy! Fuck your guy!
Sorry for the profanity.
Blood on your hands! Are you proud of yourself? Daddy, where is your gun now? And your children! Fucking murder! Oh, thumbs up! Thumbs up, kids! I'm gonna go fucking shit! Piece of shit!
All right. Well, sorry for the profanity there. I should have given better warning on that. So the interesting thing is, like, mixed along with this, like, opposition to firearm ownership is a lot of, like, profanity used towards reference of your God. It's really, really interesting that, like, the ratio of individuals that are opposed to firearm ownership and opposed to, like, the concept of a Christian worldview. And I think largely because this makes sense, these two things actually end up kind of in a way going hand in hand. Again, our understanding of the reason why we have the right to own guns is because this is a right of self-defense, and the right of self-defense is bestowed upon us by our creator, versus a worldview that is completely devoid of an external creator, seems to really, really struggle with understanding like why you would have the right of self-defense and why you'd have that personal agency. So it's really, really interesting, this massive overlap we see in those that oppose a Christian worldview and those that are entirely opposed to the right of self-defense. But anyways, so this meme, it surfaces every single time a national tragedy happens. So hopefully now you have a little bit of context how to address this when it pops up, because unfortunately you're probably going to be exposed to it too. It's a very common reoccurring thing. It's like actually, and at least now you have an ability to discuss with people why it quite literally doesn't apply in any way, shape, or form. All right.